In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and endless fields, there lived a boy named Ethan. He wasn't like the other kids in his school. While most of them spent their afternoons playing soccer or video games, Ethan preferred books and sketching. His favorite place to be was the corner of the library, where he could lose himself in stories of adventure and imagination. To him, those pages held worlds far more exciting than anything his classmates talked about. But while Ethan thrived in his own little universe, it made him different, and being different came with consequences. Ethan's troubles began when he entered middle school. Up until then, life had been simple. Sure, some kids teased him for reading too much or for not joining in on playground games, but nothing serious ever happened. Middle school changed everything. The teasing that used to feel harmless suddenly became cruel. It started with small things: snickers behind his back as he walked down the hallway, whispers about how weird he was. Then came the stolen items. His pencils would go missing from his desk, his homework torn out of his notebook. At first, Ethan tried to laugh it off, telling himself it was just kids being silly. But deep down, it hurt. Every snicker, every stolen pencil, felt like another brick being added to a wall that separated him from everyone else. The worst part was that no one seemed to notice or care. Teachers were busy with lessons and meetings, and students either joined in on the teasing or stayed silent, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Ethan felt invisible, like he didn't matter to anyone. Still, he tried to keep going, clinging to the hope that things might get better. One day, two older boys stepped into Ethan's life and turned it upside down. Their names were Jake and Ryan, and they ruled the schoolyard with an iron fist. They were known for picking on weaker students, using fear to maintain their status as the toughest guys around. When they set their sights on Ethan, his already difficult life became unbearable. Jake and Ryan took turns mocking him during lunch, calling him names like nerd and loser. Sometimes they'd snatch his backpack and toss it across the cafeteria, leaving Ethan scrambling to retrieve it while everyone laughed. Each incident chipped away at Ethan's confidence, making him dread going to school more and more. But the bullying didn't stop at school. One afternoon, as Ethan was walking home alone, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Jake and Ryan following him, grinning wickedly. Panic surged through him as they closed the distance between them. Before he knew it, they had him, cornered against a brick wall near the park. "Hey, loser," Jake sneered, shoving Ethan roughly. "What's in your bag? Got any snacks for us?" Ethan shook his head, clutching his backpack tightly. He didn't want to give in, but he was terrified. Ryan stepped closer, grabbing the straps of the bag and yanking it out of Ethan's hands. They rummaged through it, pulling out his books, and scattering them on the ground. Laughing, they kicked dirt onto the pages before tossing the empty bag back at him. As Ethan crouched down to gather his belongings, tears stung his eyes. He hated feeling so powerless, so small. Why did they have to pick on him? What had he ever done to deserve this? The questions swirled in his mind, but no answers came. All he could do was pick up the pieces, literally and figuratively, and trudge home, carrying the weight of humiliation on his shoulders. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, replaying the events of the day over and over again. His parents were watching TV downstairs, oblivious to the storm raging inside their son. He wanted to tell them what had happened, to ask for help. But something stopped him. Would they even believe him? Or would they dismiss it as kids being kids? Deep down, Ethan feared the latter. So instead of speaking up, he stayed silent, burying his pain beneath layers of shame and anger. The next morning, Ethan woke up with dark circles under his eyes. He dragged himself to school, dreading what awaited him. As he walked through the hallways, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. But Jake and Ryan weren't done with him yet. During science class, they flicked paper balls at the back of his head, giggling whenever he flinched. In gym class, they tripped him during a game of dodgeball, sending him sprawling onto the floor. Laughter erupted around him, echoing in his ears like nails on a chalkboard. By the end of the day, Ethan felt completely drained. He couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled or laughed. Everything felt heavy, suffocating. Despite the constant torment, a tiny spark of defiance flickered within Ethan. He may have been scared, but he wasn't ready to give up. Not entirely. Somewhere deep inside, he still believed he deserved better. He deserved to walk through the halls without looking over his shoulder. He deserved to sit in class without fearing ridicule. And most importantly, he deserved to stand up for himself, even if it meant risking everything. Little did Ethan know that moment of reckoning was closer than he thought. The bullies' relentless attacks were pushing him closer to his breaking point. Something had to give, and soon. For now, though, Ethan continued to endure, holding on to the fragile hope that things might someday improve. But as each day passed, that hope grew dimmer, replaced by a simmering anger that threatened to boil over at any moment. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change Ethan's life forever. Whether it would lead to triumph or disaster remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: Ethan's quiet patience was running out. After the harrowing incident at the park, Ethan knew he couldn't keep suffering in silence. The constant bullying was eating away at him, leaving scars that no one could see, but that he felt every single day. He decided to take a step he had been avoiding for far too long: telling someone about what was happening. His first thought was to go to his parents. Surely they would understand and help him find a way to stop Jake and Ryan from tormenting him. That evening, as his mom prepared dinner and his dad read the newspaper, Ethan mustered up the courage to speak. "Mom, Dad," he began hesitantly, clutching the edges of his chair. His voice trembled, betraying the anxiety bubbling inside him. "Something's been going on at school, and I don't know what to do anymore." His parents exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. Ethan told them everything: the stolen pencils, the taunts in the cafeteria, the attack near the park. He even showed them the torn pages of his books and the bruises on his arms where Jake and Ryan had shoved him against the wall. At first, his parents listened intently, nodding along as if they understood how much pain their son was in. But when Ethan asked if they could talk to the school or confront Jake and Ryan's parents, their response caught him off guard. "Ethan," his dad said firmly, folding his newspaper and setting it aside, "you need to learn to handle this yourself. Life isn't always fair, and people won't always treat you kindly. Standing up for yourself builds character." His mom chimed in, adding, "We're not saying you should fight back violently, but maybe try ignoring them or walking away. Bullies feed off attention." Ethan felt his heart sink. He had hoped for support, for guidance, for someone to stand beside him, but instead he was being told to toughen up and deal with it alone. It wasn't the answer he wanted to hear, but deep down he wasn't entirely surprised. His parents had always valued independence and resilience, often reminding him that life required strength. Still, their words stung. If his own family wouldn't believe him enough to act, who would? The next morning, Ethan dragged himself out of bed, feeling more defeated than ever. He knew he couldn't rely on his parents, so he turned to another adult he trusted, Ms. Carter, his English teacher. She was kind and approachable, always encouraging her students to speak up and share their thoughts. During recess, Ethan lingered, behind after class, nervously twisting the hem of his shirt as he waited for the other students to leave. When the classroom emptied, he approached Ms. Carter's desk, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Carter, can I talk to you about something?" Ms. Carter looked up from her papers, smiling warmly. "Of course, Ethan. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Ethan spilled everything, every insult, every shove, every moment of humiliation. He told her about Jake and Ryan, about the stolen backpack, and about how scared he felt walking home alone. Tears welled up in his eyes as he spoke, his voice cracking under the weight of emotions he had kept bottled up for so long. Ms. Carter listened patiently, her expression softening with each word. When Ethan finished, she reached across her desk and placed a comforting hand on his. "Ethan, I'm so sorry you've had to go through this," she said sincerely. "No one deserves to be treated that way. Let me look into it, okay? I'll speak to the principal and see if we can put an end to this." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would finally listen and take action. He thanked Ms. Carter and left the classroom feeling lighter than he had in days. For the rest of the week, he held on to the belief that things were about to change. But as the days passed, Ethan realized nothing was improving. In fact, the bullying seemed to grow worse. Jake and Ryan, perhaps sensing that Ethan had spoken to someone, became even bolder in their attacks. They started calling him names in front of teachers, making sure to stay within earshot but never crossing the line into outright violence. During lunch, they'd mockingly ask, "Hey, loser, did you tattle on us again?" Their laughter echoed in the cafeteria, drawing stares from other students who quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. Ethan tried to ignore them, focusing, instead on waiting for Ms. Carter to follow through on her promise. But when he approached her a week later, she avoided meeting his gaze. "I spoke to the principal," she admitted reluctantly. "But there's not much they can do without concrete evidence. And since Jake and Ryan are careful not to get caught red-handed..." Her voice trailed off, leaving Ethan feeling cold and hollow. Frustration bubbled inside him. How could the adults in his life fail him so completely? Why didn't anyone care enough to protect him? Each unanswered plea for help only fueled his growing anger. He began to feel like the entire world had turned its back on him, leaving him to face the bullies alone. One particularly bad day, Ethan found himself cornered in the boys' bathroom during break. Jake and Ryan had followed him in, slamming, the door shut behind them. "So you think you're smart, huh?" Jake sneered, shoving Ethan against the tiled wall, running to teachers and crying like a baby. Real tough guy move. Ethan clenched his fists, his body trembling with rage. He wanted to scream, to fight back, to make them pay for everything they'd done to him. But fear held him back. Instead, he stood there silently, enduring their jeers and insults until the bell rang, signaling the end of break. As the weeks dragged on, Ethan's frustration turned into despair. He stopped confiding in anyone, convinced that no one would truly help him. His grades began to slip, and he withdrew further into himself, spending hours locked in his room sketching dark, angry pictures. The once bright spark in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a dull emptiness. Even his love for books couldn't distract him anymore. The stories that used to transport him to magical worlds now felt hollow and meaningless. Yet, amidst the darkness, a dangerous thought began to take root in Ethan's mind. If no one else would stand up for him, then maybe he had to take matters into his own hands. The idea terrified him. It went against everything he believed in. But the anger simmering inside him refused to be ignored. Every shove, every insult, every bruise fueled his resolve. He didn't know exactly what he would do, but one thing was certain. He couldn't keep letting Jake and Ryan win. Unbeknownst to Ethan, his breaking point was fast approaching. The tension between him and the bullies was reaching a boiling point, and soon it would explode in a way that none of them could have predicted. For now, though, Ethan continued to endure, clinging to the fragile hope that somehow, some way, justice would prevail. But deep down, he knew that waiting for others to save him wasn't working, and that meant it was only a matter of time before he snapped. Ethan's breaking point came on a cold, gray Monday morning. The sky was overcast, mirroring the storm brewing inside him. As he walked into school, he noticed something unusual about his locker. A bright red spray-painted word stared back at him. Loser. Students gathered around, pointing and laughing, while Jake and Ryan stood nearby, smirking proudly. Ethan froze, his heart pounding as humiliation washed over him. It wasn't just the graffiti. It was the public spectacle of it all. Everyone saw him as weak, pathetic, someone unworthy of respect. For weeks, Ethan had tried to endure the bullying in silence, hoping things would improve. But this blatant act of cruelty felt like a final blow. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. His chest tightened with anger, frustration, and shame. How could they do this? Why wouldn't anyone stop them? Every attempt he'd made to seek help had failed. Teachers ignored the problem. His parents dismissed it as a lesson in resilience, and even Ms. Carter, who had promised to intervene, hadn't been able to change anything. Ethan realized then that no one was coming to save him. If he wanted justice, or even just peace, he would have to fight for it himself. Later that day, during gym class, the tension reached its peak. Ethan was changing in the locker room when Jake and Ryan cornered him again. They sneered, their voices dripping with mockery. "What's wrong, loser? You gonna cry now?" Jake taunted, shoving Ethan hard enough to knock him off balance. Ethan stumbled backward, his back hitting the cold metal lockers with a loud clang. The sound echoed through the empty room, but it barely registered in Ethan's ears. All he could hear was the blood rushing in his veins, the rage building inside him like a volcano ready to erupt. Ryan laughed cruelly, stepping closer. "Maybe we should teach you a lesson," he said, raising a fist as if preparing to strike. Something snapped inside Ethan. Enough was enough. He couldn't take another moment of being pushed around, humiliated, or treated like nothing. Without thinking, Ethan lunged forward, tackling Jake to the ground. The two boys crashed onto the tiled floor, grappling furiously. Ethan swung wildly, landing punches wherever he could. Shocked by the sudden retaliation, Jake fought back, throwing his own blows. The commotion drew attention quickly. Other students rushed into the locker room, forming a circle around the fighters and chanting, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" Some cheered for Jake, others remained silent, but none stepped in to stop it. Meanwhile, Ryan tried to pull Ethan off his friend, only to receive an elbow to the face. Chaos reigned as fists flew and tempers flared. Finally, Coach Harris burst into the room, blowing his whistle sharply. Break it up right now," he bellowed, pulling Ethan and Jake apart. Both boys were breathing heavily, their faces flushed and bruised, their clothes disheveled. The aftermath of the fight was swift and severe. Within minutes, Ethan and Jake were marched to the principal's office, where Principal Meyer awaited them with a stern expression. Sitting across from her desk, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that he had finally fought back, guilt for losing control, and fear of what punishment awaited him. Jake, on the other hand, looked calm and composed, already spinning a story to paint himself as the victim. Principal Meyer listened as both boys gave their versions of events. Jake claimed he had done nothing wrong, insisting that Ethan had attacked him out of nowhere. "I was just standing there minding my own business," Jake lied smoothly. "And he went crazy. I didn't even touch him." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, Principal Meyer cut him off. "We'll hear your side next," she said firmly, turning her gaze to Ethan. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. He explained how Jake and Ryan had bullied him for months, the teasing, the stolen belongings, the physical attacks. He described the spray-painted locker and the constant harassment, but as he spoke, he noticed skepticism creeping into Principal Meyer's eyes. She nodded politely but didn't seem convinced. When Ethan finished, Jake chimed in again, shaking, his head dramatically. "That's not true at all," he said. "He's just making excuses because he knows he started the fight." To Ethan's dismay, Principal Meyer seemed to believe Jake's version of events. She glanced at Ethan, her tone sharp. "Violence is never the answer, Ethan. No matter what happened, you should have come to us instead of resorting to fighting." Her words stung, especially since Ethan had gone to adults for help and gotten nowhere. Still, she handed down her decision. Both boys would be suspended, but Jake's punishment was lighter. While Ethan received a week-long suspension, Jake got off with only 3 days. When Ethan returned home that afternoon, his parents were furious. "How could you let this happen?" his dad demanded, pacing the living room. "We told you to handle things calmly, not to throw punches." His mom added, "Now everyone will think you're a troublemaker. What were you thinking?" Ethan wanted to scream, to tell them everything he'd endured, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. They wouldn't understand. Instead, he retreated to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. The suspension marked the beginning of a new chapter in Ethan's life, one filled with isolation and mistrust. When he returned to school, he found that the bullying hadn't stopped. In fact, it had gotten worse. Word of the fight spread quickly, and many students viewed Ethan as the aggressor. Even some of his former friends avoided him, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Jake and Ryan reveled in their newfound status as victims, spreading lies about Ethan to anyone who would listen. Teachers, swayed by the rumors, began treating Ethan differently, watching him closely as if expecting him to explode at any moment. Despite the mounting pressure, Ethan refused to apologize for defending himself. Yes, he regretted losing control, but he also knew he couldn't keep letting people walk all over him. The fight had changed something inside him. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of strength, a sense that maybe, just maybe, standing up for himself wasn't entirely wrong. But at the same time, he wondered if it had been worth it. Had fighting back truly made a difference? Or had it only made his life harder? One afternoon, as Ethan sat alone in the library during study hall, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, Ethan." He looked up to see Mr. Thompson, the school counselor, standing beside him. Mr. Thompson was younger than most of the staff, with a kind smile and an approachable demeanor. Ethan had seen him around but had never spoken to him directly. "Mind if I join you?" Mr. Thompson asked, gesturing to the chair across from Ethan. Reluctantly, Ethan nodded. Mr. Thompson sat down, leaning forward slightly. "I heard about what happened," he said gently. "Do you want to talk about it?" At first, Ethan hesitated. He didn't trust adults anymore, not after everything that had happened. But there was something sincere about Mr. Thompson's tone, something that made Ethan feel safe. Slowly, he began to open up, recounting the months of bullying, the failed attempts to seek help, and the explosive confrontation in the locker room. Mr. Thompson listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally to show he understood. When Ethan finished, the counselor sighed thoughtfully. "You've been through a lot," he said, "and I'm sorry no one stepped in sooner to help you. But I want you to know that violence isn't the solution. There are better ways to stand up for yourself, ways that don't involve getting hurt or punished." Ethan frowned, unsure what Mr. Thompson meant. "Like what?" he asked skeptically. "Well," Mr. Thompson replied, "for starters, we can work together to document the bullying. If we gather evidence, notes, photos, witness statements, we can present it to the administration and demand action. We can also practice assertiveness techniques, teaching you how to respond to bullies without escalating the situation, and most importantly, you don't have to face this alone. I'm here to support you every step of the way." For the first time in months, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was another way to fight back, a way that didn't leave him bruised and suspended. With Mr. Thompson's guidance, he began attending weekly counseling sessions. Together, they explored strategies for dealing with conflict and building confidence. Ethan learned how to use calm, firm language to stand up to bullies, practicing phrases like "stop bothering me" and "I don't deserve this." More importantly, he realized he wasn't the only one struggling. Other students confided in him, sharing their own experiences with bullying. Together, they formed a small support group, vowing to look out for one another and report incidents to the administration. As the weeks passed, Ethan grew stronger, not physically, but emotionally. He still faced challenges, of course. Jake and Ryan continued to taunt him, though less frequently now that he stood his ground. Teachers remained skeptical, and some students still avoided him. But Ethan no longer cared what they thought. He had found allies in Mr. Thompson and his new friends, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had control over his life. Looking back, Ethan knew the journey hadn't been easy. He had faced pain, rejection, and injustice. But he had also discovered inner strength he never knew he possessed. The scars of his past remained, but they served as reminders of how far he'd come. Most importantly, Ethan learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean fighting alone. Sometimes, it means finding others who believe in you and working. The suspension loomed over Ethan like a dark cloud. For 7 long days he stayed home, missing classes, sports practices, and the few social interactions he used to have before everything unraveled. Each day felt longer than the last. His parents tried to keep him occupied by assigning chores or suggesting he catch up on schoolwork, but Ethan couldn't focus. All he could think about was how unfair it all felt. He had been punished for defending himself, while Jake and Ryan, the real culprits, had walked away with barely a slap on the wrist. It gnawed at him. eating away at whatever little confidence he'd managed to build during his brief moment of defiance. When Ethan finally returned to school, he braced himself for what awaited him. Walking through the front doors, he felt like every eye in the hallway was on him. Whispers followed him wherever he went. "That's the kid who got suspended," someone murmured behind him. "Yeah, he beat up Jake," another voice chimed in. The rumors swirled around him, twisting the truth until even Ethan wasn't sure what people believed anymore. Some thought he was a violent troublemaker. Others saw him as a victim who had snapped under pressure. Either way, no one seemed willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, not even teachers. In class, Ethan noticed subtle changes in how he was treated. Teachers who once ignored his struggles now watched him closely, as if expecting him to explode again. During group projects, classmates hesitated to include him, afraid they might get caught in the crossfire of his supposed anger issues. Even lunch became unbearable. Instead of sitting alone quietly like before, Ethan now found himself surrounded by whispers and stares. Every bite of food felt heavy, each swallow harder than the last. He began skipping meals altogether, retreating to the library or an empty classroom just to escape the judgmental glares. But perhaps the worst part was Jake and Ryan. Far from being deterred by the fight or their lighter punishment, they seemed emboldened. They strutted through the halls like kings, smirking whenever they passed Ethan. Sometimes they'd mutter insults under their breath, knowing full well that teachers wouldn't intervene unless things escalated. "Look who's back," Jake sneered one morning as Ethan opened his locker. "Miss us, loser?" Ryan laughed, punching Jake lightly on the shoulder. Ethan clenched his fists, biting down hard on his tongue to stop himself from reacting. He knew better than to engage them again. It would only lead to more trouble. But staying silent didn't make it hurt any less. Ethan's grades began to suffer. Homework assignments piled up unread, and tests came back marked with red ink. His mind was too preoccupied with survival to focus on academics. Sleep eluded him most nights, his thoughts racing with questions he couldn't answer. Why did this happen to him? Why hadn't anyone helped him when he needed it most? Would things ever get better? The weight of these unanswered questions pressed down on him, leaving him exhausted and defeated. One afternoon, as Ethan trudged home from school, he spotted Jake and Ryan hanging out near the park, where they had attacked him weeks earlier. Their laughter carried across the distance, sharp and mocking. Ethan quickened his pace, hoping to avoid them, but fate had other plans. As he passed by, Jake called out, "Hey, loser! Still mad we kicked your butt?" Ethan froze, his heart pounding. Memories of their previous encounter flooded back. The shoves, the taunts, the sheer helplessness he had felt. For a moment he considered running, putting as much distance between himself and them as possible. But something inside him refused to back down. Without turning around, Ethan shouted, "Leave me alone." His voice cracked under the strain of pent-up frustration, but it carried enough force to make Jake and Ryan pause. They exchanged glances, then burst into laughter. "Ah, look at this guy," Ryan mocked, taking a step closer. "Trying to act tough now?" Ethan spun around, his face flushed with anger. "I'm not scared of you anymore," he said firmly, surprising even himself with his boldness. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh yeah? What are you gonna do about it?" For a split second, Ethan considered throwing another punch. He imagined the satisfaction of hitting Jake square in the jaw, watching the smirk disappear from his face. But then he remembered Mr. Thompson's advice. Violence isn't the answer. Taking a deep breath, Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "I'm done playing your games," he said evenly. "If you've got a problem with me, tell someone who cares." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jake and Ryan staring after him in stunned silence. It was a small victory, but it meant everything to Ethan. For the first time, he had stood up to his bullies without resorting to physical force. And though they continued to mock him from afar, their taunts lacked the same sting. Deep down, Ethan knew he had won a battle they hadn't expected him to fight, the battle for self-control. Back at school, things slowly began to shift. Encouraged by Mr. Thompson, Ethan started documenting instances of bullying. Whenever Jake or Ryan said something cruel, He jotted it down in a notebook, noting dates, times, and witnesses. He also reached out to other students who had been targeted, asking if they were willing to share their experiences. To his surprise, many agreed. Together, they compiled a list of incidents, presenting it to Principal Meyer in a formal meeting. At first, she dismissed their claims, citing a lack of evidence. But when Ethan handed her the notebook filled with detailed accounts and names of witnesses, she couldn't ignore it any longer. Principal Meyer promised to investigate further, though Ethan remained skeptical. He had heard similar promises before, only to see nothing change. Still, he held on to hope. If nothing else, speaking up had given him a sense of agency. He wasn't just a passive victim anymore. He was actively working to create change. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson continued to support Ethan, helping him refine his assertiveness skills. They practiced role-playing scenarios, teaching Ethan how to respond to verbal attacks without losing his temper. "Remember," Mr. Thompson reminded him, "you don't have to prove anything to them. Just stay calm and let your actions speak for themselves." Over time, Ethan grew more confident in his ability to handle difficult situations. When Jake or Ryan hurled insults his way, he responded with simple, direct statements like, "Stop talking to me," or, "I don't care what you think." His composure threw them off balance, making their taunts feel less powerful. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan noticed subtle shifts in the school environment. Other students began standing up to Jake and Ryan, refusing to laugh at their jokes or participate in their antics. Teachers, too, became more vigilant, addressing incidents of bullying more seriously. Though progress was slow, Ethan could feel the tide turning. He wasn't naive enough to believe the problem would disappear overnight, but he saw glimpses of hope, a kind word from a classmate, a teacher stepping in to stop a cruel remark, a quiet acknowledgement that things were improving. By the end of the school year, Ethan had transformed. Gone was the timid boy who cowered in the face of adversity. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. He still carried scars from the months of torment, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he had come and how much he had overcome. Looking ahead, Ethan knew challenges lay ahead. High school would bring new faces, new dynamics, and likely new forms of bullying. But he faced the future with courage, armed with the knowledge that he had allies, tools, and inner strength. Whatever came his way, he was ready to face it. Not with fists, but with determination, resilience, and an unshakable belief in his own worth. As the school year drew to a close, Ethan found himself reflecting on everything he had endured. The bullying, the fights, the suspensions, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle that had finally started coming together. But while some things were improving, others remained stubbornly unchanged. Jake and Ryan still loomed large in his life, their taunts growing quieter but no less hurtful. Teachers continued to view him with suspicion, as though one wrong move might send him spiraling back into trouble. And yet Ethan carried something new within him, a quiet determination to keep moving forward no matter what obstacles lay ahead. One day, as Ethan sat alone during lunch, sketching in his notebook, a familiar figure approached him. It was Mr. Thompson, the school counselor who had become one of his few trusted allies. "Mind if I sit?" Mr. Thompson asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from Ethan. Ethan shrugged, sliding his notebook aside to make room. Over the past few months, their conversations had shifted from venting frustrations to brainstorming solutions. Ethan appreciated Mr. Thompson's calm demeanor and practical advice, which often helped him navigate the chaos of his daily life. "You've come a long way," Mr. Thompson began, leaning back in his chair. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you've handled yourself well." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. While he felt proud of his progress, he couldn't shake the lingering sense of injustice. "It doesn't feel like enough," he admitted after a moment. "Jake and Ryan are still out there doing whatever they want. Nothing's really changed." Mr. Thompson sighed, nodding in understanding. "You're right. Things haven't changed overnight. But remember, real change takes time. What you've done so far is important. You stood up for yourself without resorting to violence. You've inspired others to speak up too. That's powerful stuff." Ethan frowned. his pencil tapping nervously against the table. But what about everyone else, the teachers who didn't believe me, the kids who laughed at me? They still treat me differently, like I'm the bad guy. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his expression serious. That's because fear and misunderstanding are hard habits to break. People see conflict and immediately look for someone to blame. In your case, they saw the fight before they understood why it happened. But here's the thing. You can't control how others think or act. What you can control is how you respond. And so far, you've responded with strength and dignity. The words resonated with Ethan, though they didn't erase the pain entirely. He knew Mr. Thompson was right. He couldn't force people to change their opinions overnight. But hearing those words reminded him that he wasn't powerless. Slowly, he began to realize that true strength wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about staying true to himself, even when the world seemed determined to knock him down. Inspired by this realization, Ethan decided to take another bold step. With Mr. Thompson's encouragement, he organized a meeting with a small group of students who had experienced similar struggles. Some were victims of bullying, while others simply wanted to help create a safer environment at school. Together, they formed a support network, vying to address the root causes of bullying rather than just its symptoms. Their first project was simple yet impactful, creating posters with messages of kindness and inclusion. Be kind, stand up, speak out, and everyone deserves respect adorned the hallways, catching the eyes of students and teachers alike. At first, many dismissed the posters as meaningless decorations, but over time, their presence began to spark conversations. Students started asking questions. Why were these posters here? Who put them up? What did they mean? Ethan and his group seized the opportunity to spread awareness. During lunch breaks, they handed out flyers explaining the dangers of bullying and encouraging bystanders to intervene when they witnessed cruelty. They also invited speakers, a local psychologist and a former student who had overcome bullying, to share their stories during assemblies. These events drew mixed reactions. Some students rolled their eyes, dismissing the talks as boring or unnecessary. Others, however, listened intently, nodding along as the speakers described the lasting impact of bullying on mental health and self-esteem. Despite the mixed reception, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the school atmosphere. Conversations about bullying became more frequent, both among students and in classrooms. Teachers, perhaps inspired by the students' initiative, began incorporating anti-bullying lessons into their curricula. Even Principal Meyer, who had initially been dismissive of Ethan's concerns, expressed cautious approval of the group's efforts. "This is a good start," she said during a brief meeting with Ethan and his peers. "Keep pushing for positive change." Encouraged by these developments, Ethan threw himself into the work, channeling his anger and frustration into productive action. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose. Instead of dwelling on the injustices he had faced, he focused on preventing others from enduring the same pain. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. But Ethan persevered, buoyed by the knowledge that he was making a difference. One afternoon, as Ethan prepared materials for an upcoming assembly, he received an unexpected visitor. It was Sarah, a shy girl from his math class whom he barely knew. She hesitated at the doorway of the empty classroom where he worked, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. Hi, Ethan," she said softly. "Can I talk to you?" Surprised but welcoming, Ethan gestured for her to sit. "Sure. What's up?" Sarah glanced around nervously before speaking. I heard about what you've been doing, about standing up to bullies and trying to help people. I wanted to say thank you." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the depth of emotion behind her words. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Thank me? For what?" "For giving me hope," Sarah replied, tears glistening in her eyes. "I've been bullied too, for years. I never thought anyone would care, or that anything could change. But seeing you stand up for yourself, it made me believe that maybe I can too." Her admission struck a chord deep within Ethan. He realized then that his journey wasn't just about personal healing or justice. It was about inspiring others to find their own strength. Sarah's gratitude reminded him of his own turning point when Mr. Thompson had offered him guidance and support. Now he was paying it forward, becoming a source of hope for someone else. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Sarah grew closer, bonding over shared experiences and mutual goals. She joined his group, contributing fresh ideas and lending her voice to discussions about bullying prevention. Together, they planned workshops, wrote letters to the administration advocating for stricter policies, and reached out to parents and community members for additional support. Their efforts gained momentum, drawing attention not only within the school but also beyond its walls. Local newspapers picked up on the story, publishing articles about the student-led movement to combat bullying. Parents praised the initiative, urging schools across the district to adopt similar programs. Teachers marveled at the transformation taking place before their eyes. Even skeptics began to acknowledge the power of collective action, recognizing that lasting change required collaboration, not just punishment. Of course, not everyone was pleased. Jake and Ryan, sensing their influence waning, lashed out in frustration. They mocked Ethan and his group, calling them losers and do-gooders. But their words lacked the venom they once held. Fewer students laughed at their insults, and those who did often whispered apologies later. The tide was turning, and Jake and Ryan knew it. By the end of the school year, Ethan felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. But for the first time, he faced the future with optimism. He had learned valuable lessons about resilience, leadership, and the importance of standing up for oneself and others. Most importantly, he had discovered that he wasn't alone. Whether through Mr. Thompson's guidance, Sarah's friendship, or the unwavering support of his group, Ethan had built a network of allies who believed in him and shared his vision for a better world. Looking back, Ethan realized that his journey hadn't been about revenge or vindication. It had been about finding his voice, reclaiming his dignity, and using his experiences to create meaningful change. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, they served as reminders of how far he had come. And as he walked across the stage at graduation, diploma in hand, Ethan knew one thing for certain. He had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. The final weeks of the school year passed in a blur for Ethan. Between wrapping up classes, preparing for exams, and continuing his anti-bullying initiatives, he barely had time to process how much his life had changed. What started as a lonely battle against relentless tormentors had transformed into something bigger than himself, a movement that inspired others to stand up, speak out, and demand kindness. But as the reality of graduation loomed closer, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, would the changes he'd helped create last, or would they fade away once summer arrived and students scattered to different paths? On the last day of school, Ethan stood in the crowded gymnasium, surrounded by classmates buzzing with excitement. Caps and gowns rustled as students hugged, laughed, and posed for photos. For many, this was a moment of triumph, a celebration of hard work and perseverance. But for Ethan, it carried an added layer of meaning. He wasn't just celebrating academic achievements. He was marking the end of a chapter defined by pain, growth, and resilience. As Principal Meyer took the stage to deliver her closing remarks, Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the beginning of the year. Back then, he had been invisible, just another name on the roster, easily overlooked or dismissed. Now he was someone people recognized not because of the fight that had landed him in trouble, but because of the courage he had shown afterward. His name was mentioned in speeches, his efforts acknowledged alongside those of honor roll students and star athletes. It was surreal, almost like watching someone else's story unfold. Principal Meyer's voice brought him back to the present. "This year," she said, glancing around the room, "we've seen incredible acts of leadership and compassion. Students have come together to tackle issues that matter deeply, not just to them, but to our entire community." She paused, scanning the audience until her eyes landed on Ethan. I want to take a moment to thank individuals like Ethan Carter, whose determination to make a difference has inspired us all. A smattering of applause broke out, growing louder as more students joined in. Ethan felt heat rise to his cheeks, unsure whether to smile or shrink into his seat. Beside him, Sarah nudged his arm playfully. "You deserve it," she whispered, grinning. Ethan nodded, still processing the weight of the moment. Recognition wasn't something he had sought. It wasn't why he had poured so much energy into the anti-bullying campaign, but hearing his name spoken with respect filled him with pride. After the ceremony, Ethan wandered outside where families gathered to congratulate graduates and snap pictures. His own parents approached him, their expressions softer than they had been months ago. "We're proud of you, son," his dad said, clapping him on the shoulder. His mom added, "You've grown so much this year. We see it now, the strength you've found, the person you've become." Their words caught Ethan off guard. For so long he had felt unsupported, misunderstood. Now standing there in his cap and gown, he realized how far his relationship with his parents had come too. Later that evening, as Ethan sat alone in his room, he allowed himself to reflect on everything he had overcome. The memories came flooding back, the stolen pencils, the taunts in the cafeteria, the shove against the brick wall near the park. Each incident had chipped away at his confidence, leaving him feeling powerless and invisible. Yet somehow, through sheer willpower and the support of unexpected allies, he had risen above it all. He had turned his pain into purpose, using his experiences to spark change. But Ethan knew the journey wasn't over. High school might be ending, but life was just beginning. As he packed away his belongings and prepared to leave the only home he'd ever known, he thought about what lay ahead. College awaited him in the fall, a new city, new faces, new challenges. Would he face bullying again? Probably. People could be cruel no matter where you went. But Ethan also knew he was stronger now. Stronger emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. He had learned how to stand up for himself without resorting to violence. He had discovered the power of speaking up not just for himself, but for others who couldn't find their voices yet. Ethan's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Mr. Thompson. "Congratulations, Ethan. You've accomplished so much this year. Remember, your strength lies not in fighting battles alone, but in building bridges. Keep inspiring others." Ethan smiled, saving the message to revisit whenever doubt crept in. Mr. Thompson had been right about so many things, about finding allies, about staying calm under pressure, about turning anger into action. Ethan owed much of his transformation to the counselor's guidance. That night, as Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he made a promise to himself. No matter where life took him, he would continue advocating for kindness and respect. Whether through formal campaigns, casual conversations, or simply leading by example, he vowed to be a force for good. The world needed more people willing to stand up against cruelty, to remind others that everyone deserved to feel safe and valued. And if Ethan could inspire even one person to join him in that mission, it would be worth it. Summer flew by in a whirlwind of goodbyes and preparations. Ethan spent hours reconnecting with old friends, attending barbecues, and helping his parents pack boxes for his move. But amid the chaos, he never lost sight of his goals. He stayed in touch with Sarah and other members of the anti-bullying group, brainstorming ways to expand their efforts beyond high school. Together, they created a social media page dedicated to sharing resources, stories, and tips for combating bullying. Within weeks, it gained traction, attracting followers from across the country. When the day finally came for Ethan to leave for college, he felt a mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a tinge of sadness. Saying goodbye to his family was harder than he expected, but knowing he carried their love and support gave him comfort. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Ethan looked out the window at the familiar streets fading into the distance. This, was it, the start of a new adventure? College proved to be both thrilling and challenging. On campus, Ethan quickly found his footing, joining clubs and making friends who shared his values. When he noticed signs of bullying among freshmen, he didn't hesitate to step in, offering advice and encouragement. Word spread about his background, and soon, students began seeking him out for guidance. Professors praised his leadership skills, inviting him to speak at workshops and seminars. Slowly but surely, Ethan built a reputation as someone who cared deeply about creating positive change. Looking back years later, Ethan realized that his high school struggles had shaped him in ways he couldn't have imagined. They had taught him resilience, empathy, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. Most importantly, they had shown him that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. By refusing to give up, by choosing to fight back, not with fists but with courage and conviction, he had not only saved himself, but also inspired countless others to do the same. Ethan's story became a testament to the power of perseverance. It reminded people that while life might throw obstacles in your path, you have the strength to overcome them. Sometimes all it takes is one brave act, one moment of defiance, to ignite a chain reaction of change. And though scars may remain, they serve as reminders of battles fought and won, of lessons learned and lives touched. For Ethan, the journey was ongoing. There would always be challenges, moments of doubt, and days when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. But he faced them head-on, armed with the knowledge that he wasn't alone. Whether through friendships forged in hardship, mentors who believed in him, or strangers inspired by his story, Ethan carried a network of support wherever he went. And as long as he kept moving forward, with kindness, courage, and an unshakable belief in the goodness of humanity, he knew he could handle whatever came next. In the end, Ethan's legacy wasn't just about surviving bullying. It was about thriving despite it, about transforming pain into purpose and fear into strength. It was about proving that even the quietest voices can make the loudest impact. And as he walked confidently into the future, Ethan knew one thing. For certain, his fight was far from over, but neither was his ability to inspire, lead, and change the world.